Ozzy Osbourne was always seen as someone almost impossible to understand. People looked at him and wondered how a man who lived through so much chaos could still stand on stage, smile, and keep going year after year. His life was full of wild moments, heavy drinking, drug addiction, and dangerous behavior that would have destroyed almost anyone else. What many people never knew is that inside his body, he carried a genetic makeup that made him 6 times more likely to become addicted than the average person. Scientists later revealed that his genes didn't just make him vulnerable to addiction, they also played a role in why he was able to stay alive despite doing so much damage to himself. After his recent passing, the world has been asking one question again and again. How did he survive for so long? How did someone who spent decades drowning his body in alcohol, narcotics, and non-stop pressure manage to live a life that kept going far beyond what seemed medically possible? Years before he died, a team of researchers sequenced his DNA to learn more about him. They thought it would be a routine test. They had no reason to expect anything unusual. But when the results appeared, the scientists were stunned. They discovered things in his genetic code that didn't appear in almost anyone else. Some experts even admitted that they stared at the data in disbelief. One researcher quietly whispered, "This is impossible." That simple statement eventually became a perfect description of his entire life, especially the way he kept performing, touring, and surviving against all odds. Hidden inside his DNA were clues that explained not only his resilience, but also his addictions, his energy, and even the ancient origins of some of his genes. Pieces of very old human ancestry appeared in his code, fragments that set him apart from most modern people. It turned out that the truth about who Ozzy Osbourne really was, at least on a biological level, was far stranger and much more fascinating than anyone ever imagined. When Ozzy's blood arrived at the cofactor genomics lab, nobody prepared themselves for what they were about to find. The team expected to see normal sequences, maybe a few mutations from age or lifestyle, but nothing extraordinary. Then something unusual happened. As the machines started reading his genetic code, they began flagging one anomaly after another. Strange patterns appeared, gene variations that didn't match any known human samples in their databases. It was like his DNA was speaking a different language. One scientist leaned back and said, "This can't be right." Another repeated the test just to be sure, but the same results came up again. Ozzy's DNA was behaving in a way that scientists rarely ever saw. Genes linked to how the body handles drugs, how the brain processes dopamine, and how nerves communicate were showing rare and unusual alterations. This wasn't a mild variation from the average person. These mutations looked like they had adapted to survive extreme conditions. His genome seemed almost engineered for extremes, built to handle toxins that should have shut his body down, built to repair itself under chemical attack, built to push through punishment that would have killed most people. That alone was shocking. But what they discovered next was even stranger. When they mapped parts of his ancestry, they found pieces of ancient DNA hidden inside one of his chromosomes. On chromosome 10, there were signs of Neanderthal ancestry, real genetic evidence, not a metaphor or assumption. Ozzy Osbourne carried a genetic signature linking him to a long-extinct species of early humans. At first, the researchers thought it might be contamination. Maybe a sample got mixed up somewhere. But after checking again and again, the data proved real. Suddenly, the idea that this man had survived overdoses, car crashes, near-death experiences, and decades of constant touring no longer seemed so unbelievable. Maybe, in some strange way, he had inherited something ancient from early humans, something strong and tough that allowed him to take more damage than most modern bodies could handle. Word of these results quickly spread through the scientific community. Some geneticists joked that Ozzy was a new branch of humanity, part modern human, part rock and roll Neanderthal. Behind the jokes was genuine fascination. His genome wasn't just interesting. It was a doorway into understanding how the human body can adapt, mutate, and sometimes defy everything science expects. Experts started asking new questions. What else was hiding inside his DNA? Why did his brain process drugs and alcohol differently than other people? Could the same ancient genes that helped early humans survive harsh environments be part of the reason Ozzy survived the chaos of his own life? The deeper the scientists looked, the more they realized that his DNA was telling a story just as wild as his public life. When Cofactor Genomics and another company called Gnome Incorporated agreed to sequence his entire genome, they didn't know what they were stepping into. Their main goal was simply to see if all the years of heavy drinking and drug use had left a genetic mark on his body. Some celebrities had been studied before, but Ozzy's case was different. Scientists were not looking for health risks. They were looking for answers. They wanted to understand how this man had lived through repeated overdoses, how he survived giant amounts of alcohol, and how he continued to perform with so much energy even after decades of physical abuse. They began their research with a blood sample taken from Ozzy in July 2010. When the results came back, they were shocked. They weren't looking at the DNA of an ordinary 61-year-old man. They were staring at a biological puzzle that didn't match any ordinary patterns. His genome contained rare mutations related to how the body breaks down alcohol. Most people process alcohol at a steady pace using enzymes their liver produces. Ozzy's variant allowed him to break down certain chemicals faster than the average person. It didn't protect him from the harmful effects of drinking, but it meant the worst damage didn't hit him as quickly as it would hit someone else. Another rare mutation was found in a gene connected to nerve communication. This mutation created a slightly different kind of protein that affected how signals traveled through his brain. This could influence things like movement, impulse control, addiction, and even creativity. Scientists realized that this gene may have given him a brain wired for excitement, intensity, and constant stimulation. At the same time, it may have pushed him towards substances that made those sensations even stronger. They also found a mutation linked to dopamine, a brain chemical responsible for motivation, risk-taking, pleasure, and energy. This helped explain why Ozzy always seemed full of wild energy even in his 60s. It also explained why he was drawn to drugs and alcohol that enhanced that dopamine response. Many people with similar variants tend to chase high-reward, risky experiences. For Ozzy, that drive showed up in addiction, but also in performance, fame, and his relentless desire to keep creating music. When the scientists met with Ozzy to discuss the results, they said he was surprisingly interested. He wasn't looking for excuses for his past behavior. He genuinely wanted to understand why he was still alive. He said something famous in an interview: "Given the swimming pools of booze I've guzzled, there's no plausible medical reason why I should still be alive. Maybe my DNA could say why." And in many ways, it did. His genes seemed unusually active in repairing small amounts of damage before they became deadly. That didn't make him indestructible, but it did give him a stronger biological safety net than most people have. Still, the scientists reminded everyone that genetics alone didn't tell the whole story. Luck, environment, lifestyle, personality, and fate all played a role. No one is invincible, and Ozzy certainly suffered the consequences of his choices, from injuries to illnesses. But it was impossible to ignore that his genetic code contained rare advantages that helped him survive far longer than anyone expected. This also led to deeper questions. If genes affect addiction, creativity, or risk-taking, how much control do people really have over their own behavior? The scientists were careful to explain that while genes can influence tendencies, they do not decide a person's life. People still have free will, the ability to change, and the responsibility to make choices. But even with those reminders, Ozzy's DNA still revealed something fascinating about the mix of personality and biology. His rare genetic traits may have been part of the reason behind his creativity, his unpredictable behavior, and his magnetic personality. They might have contributed to the energy that made him one of the most iconic rock stars of all time. Yet they also played a role in the dangerous behaviors that nearly killed him more than once. The closer scientists looked, the more they understood that his identity wasn't built on a single gene or a simple explanation. It was built on a network of tiny traits interacting in complicated ways. What amazed the researchers most was not just the list of rare mutations, but the mysteries they couldn't solve. Even with all their advanced tools and knowledge, they couldn't identify one special gene that made him who he was. There was no single rock star gene, no single mutation responsible for his survival. Instead, they found complexity, biology filled with contradictions, resilience mixed with vulnerability, danger mixed with endurance. And tied into that complexity was something older and stranger, a link to ancient human lineage. This ancestral connection hinted that even thousands of years later, pieces of ancient DNA can still shape how a modern person survives, adapts, and lives. In the end, Ozzy Osbourne's genome revealed a story as wild and complicated as his real life. It explained some of his strength, some of his struggles, and some of the mystery that made him unforgettable. Even after his passing, the secrets inside his DNA continue to fascinate scientists and fans around the world. His life may have ended, but the questions he left behind about human biology, ancient ancestry, and the limits of survival will likely be studied for many years to come. Ozzy Osbourne's genetic story began with a surprising discovery that no one expected. When scientists studied his DNA, they first thought they would simply find the usual mix of European ancestry. Instead, they uncovered something that shocked everyone. Hidden deep inside his DNA, on a small section of chromosome 10, there was a piece of genetic material that did not belong to modern humans at all. It came from Neanderthals, the ancient human relatives who lived tens of thousands of years ago and eventually disappeared. At first, the researchers thought it must be a mistake. Sometimes DNA samples get contaminated or mixed, and since Ozzy was such a well-known figure, they wanted to be absolutely sure. They checked the data again and again, and every time, the Neanderthal sequence remained. It was real. Ozzy Osbourne, one of the wildest and most unpredictable rock stars in history, carried the genetic fingerprints of an ancient species inside his body. Many people in Europe and Asia carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA, usually around 1 to 4%, so Ozzy was not unique in that sense. But the discovery felt strangely fitting. A man who had survived decades of heavy alcohol use, drug abuse, and dangerous behavior carried a tiny spark of prehistoric toughness inside him. One scientist even joked that maybe Ozzy's body was still running on Stone Age software. Although it was said as a joke, there was a scientific truth behind it, because some Neanderthal genes are linked to pain tolerance, the way the body processes fat, and how the immune system reacts to infections. These genes helped ancient humans survive harsh winters, dangerous hunts, and constant physical challenges. Some of those genes still work in people today. Scientists wondered whether Ozzy might have inherited a few of those traits, which could have helped him survive the extreme stress he put his body through for so many years. It created a poetic connection between ancient survival and his own chaotic, unpredictable life. The media went wild with the story. Headlines described him as part caveman or Neanderthal in a leather jacket. Ozzy himself found it hilarious and said he always suspected he wasn't fully human. But beyond the jokes, there was something deep and meaningful about the discovery. It reminded people that inside every human being, there are traces of ancestors who lived long before recorded history, and their struggles still influence us today. In Ozzy's case, those ancient fragments had somehow become part of his legendary life story. The discovery also sparked a new interest in how genetics might influence creativity. Scientists have debated for years whether music, rhythm, and artistic talent are uniquely human traits or if they come from deeper evolutionary roots. If Ozzy carried echoes of an ancient species inside him, could some part of that ancient wiring have shaped his instincts as a musician? There is no way to prove it, but the question fascinated many people. Music is one of the oldest human behaviors, and some think it might have existed even in early species long before modern humans appeared. The reaction from the public was just as surprising as the scientific discovery. Suddenly, people who had never cared about genetics were reading about DNA in music magazines and watching documentaries about evolution. Ozzy accidentally became the face of a scientific breakthrough, showing that genetics is not just something studied in labs, it is something that shapes our lives in ways we do not always see. Nathan Pearson, one of the researchers, said that Neanderthals were once believed to have no descendants, but now we know their DNA lives on in millions of people. Ozzy's results just happened to stand out in a memorable way. As scientists looked deeper into his DNA, they began to see patterns that explained some of the mysteries about his ability to survive things that would have killed most people. One of the first clues came from a gene variant near ADH4, which affects how the liver breaks down alcohol. Most people's bodies struggle to handle large amounts of alcohol, but Ozzy's system was able to break it down faster than normal. This did not protect him from the damage caused by alcohol, but it might have helped him survive levels that would poison others. It was as if his body had a built-in survival mode that activated whenever he consumed harmful substances. They also found differences in the genes that regulate dopamine, the chemical in the brain that affects pleasure, motivation, and addiction. People with unusual dopamine activity often seek powerful experiences to feel satisfied, and they may struggle with addiction more easily. In Ozzy's case, his dopamine system seemed to operate differently from most people, which could explain why he constantly chased intense highs, whether through drugs, alcohol, or performing on stage. His brain might have been wired for intensity from birth. This same wiring could also have fueled his talent, because music itself can create powerful dopamine surges. Scientists realized that the same genes that made him prone to addiction might also have made him a magnetic, energetic performer. Researchers stressed that genes do not control destiny. Environment, trauma, choices, and lifestyle all shape a person's behavior. But the patterns in his DNA offered clues that his survival was partly written into his biology. His DNA told the story of a man built to endure extreme experiences. It helped explain why, even after years of dangerous habits, he continued to perform, travel, and live a life filled with chaos and excitement. For scientists, studying Ozzy's genome was like watching a live demonstration of human resilience. Another question began to rise among researchers. Could some parts of musical talent be connected to genetics? There is no single gene that creates music ability, but Ozzy had variations in genes related to neural communication and timing. One of these, called CLTCL1, influences how signals move through the nerves, which can affect coordination and rhythm. These traits do not guarantee musical talent, but they may help someone learn rhythm more easily or respond to sound in a unique way. While there is still no clear proof, researchers believe that genes can support certain aspects of creativity, and Ozzy's genome offered interesting clues. Ozzy himself enjoyed the idea that evolution might have used him as an experiment. His body had survived terrible injuries, substance abuse, and exhausting tours. His mind had endured stress that would break most people. Yet, he kept moving forward, almost as if his body was built to repair itself faster than it could be destroyed. Scientists discovered that some of his genetic variations were connected to how quickly the body repairs damaged cells. These repair genes help remove unhealthy cells and replace them with new ones. Usually, long-term drug or alcohol abuse damages this system until the body can no longer recover. But Ozzy seemed to have repair mechanisms that worked unusually well. It was like having an internal cleanup crew that never stopped working, even when the rest of his body was struggling. This led some researchers to ask whether Ozzy's DNA might help scientists learn more about human survival. Pharmaceutical companies studying addiction and longevity became interested in his results. If scientists could understand the genetic factors that helped him survive so long under such harsh conditions, they might find new ways to help others. His genome became more than just a scientific curiosity. It became a potential roadmap for future medical research. Despite the excitement, Ozzy remained humble. He liked to say that he was not indestructible, he was simply lucky. But his genome revealed a deeper truth. Evolution works by creating variation. Some people have traits that make them more resistant to illness, stress, or environmental dangers. Others have traits that put them at risk. Ozzy's DNA showed a mix of both, forming a balance that kept him alive even when he pushed himself to the limit. His story also raised philosophical questions about life and destiny. How much of our path is shaped by our genes, and how much by our choices? Are we all carrying hidden strengths inside us, or hidden weaknesses we do not know about? Ozzy's genome reminded people that every human being is made from a long history of survival and adaptation. The traits of our ancestors still live within us, helping us face challenges in ways we do not always understand. In the final years of his life, Ozzy often joked about being part of genetic history, but the truth is that his genome became a symbol of human resilience. Even after his passing, the story of his DNA remains a powerful lesson. It shows that evolution is still at work inside each of us. It shapes how we cope with stress, how we recover from harm, and how we adapt to difficult circumstances. In Ozzy's case, those ancient survival instincts became part of his music, his personality, and his unbelievable ability to stay alive through decades of chaos. His life proved that sometimes the most unexpected people carry the strongest instincts. Deep inside his DNA were traces of Neanderthals, markers of survival, and clues to why he lived so boldly. His genome held pieces of human history, reminders of ancient struggles, and evidence of modern resilience. Through every scream on stage, every risky moment, and every heartbeat that refused to give up, his body carried the story of survival written across thousands of years.